taught from kindergarten through 12th grade students and over 30 plus years. So I'm kind of living the dream now where I do this when I want to, and I love working in these adult workshops. It's just a totally different time for me, and it's been a lot of fun. So I had great teachers, a fantastic high school art teacher, great college teachers. I always loved art, and that's just kind of why I'm continuing on with it. So it's a journey. I always feel like there's lots more to learn, and that's what makes it fun and challenging. So how I got this set up, and then we'll get into the painting as quickly as we can here, but a couple of quick things. Let me just talk about the paper, just the materials real briefly. You're going to get out of the materials what you paid for them. So, if you're using cheaper materials, they'll get you by and you'll do fine. But if you step up and you get some of the higher grade paper and paints, you are going to notice a big difference. So, for example, the paper that I prefer is the Arches. There are lots of good brands out there. I'm used to the Arches, and I think that's the trick. And the key to it is, whatever materials you're using, it's tempting to hop around. You hear about this brand, the paints are great, and you're using a different brand of paints. I think the key is to learn the ones that you've got really first, and so that for example, which paints are going to separate and create really interesting effects. Certain brands, like for example the Winsor Newton Cerulean Blue, will granulate, and it's gorgeous. And then you buy another high-end, good quality brand of paint and try the Cerulean Blue, and it doesn't do that at all. So what I'm saying is learn the brand that you're using, and that will help you out as you go through your painting. So with the watercolor paper, there's basically three types. There's the cold press, and you don't need to worry about what exactly that means, except that the cold press has a medium texture. So if you like a medium texture paper, which is what I prefer to use, go with the cold press. If you want a real rough surface, if you're doing a technique where you're not looking for super tight details, but more of a textured, looser effect probably, go with the rough. That's what it's called, rough paper. And then the hot press paper is very smooth. And there's also the Yupo, which is super water resistant and almost like a slick kind of a surface. I've used it very seldomly. It just wasn't my thing. But if you have a looser technique and you're wanting to really play around with pores and stuff, experiment with different types of paper. But basically you've got the smooth, which is the hot press, the medium, which is the cold press, and then the rough. And I can, if you're forgetting any of this info, we'll have it, and I can just ask if you want anything clarified. So if you don't have good watercolor paper, or you don't have any watercolor paper, I've got full sheets of Arches, 140 pound. And the weights are different also. The 140 pound, from what I understand, is what the weight of a roll, or basically a full ream of the paper, weighs 140 pounds. It's a medium weight paper. It's really nice because what I like about it is it'll fit in one of these just pre-cut frames. This is just a Michaels pre-cut frame. If you take your watercolor painting to a professional framer, and if you do like the non-glare glass, you're going to be into easily a couple $100. I mean, it doesn't take long. A lot of my paintings are $300 frame jobs, because you'll get a mat, you'll get the frame, you'll get the glass, the whole thing. By the time you go out the door, it's $300. This was like 70, maybe 60, 70, something like that. The glass is regular glass, but what I've done with it is I've varnished it with a spray varnish that is UV blocking. There's a couple of tricks that I'll explain about that, because it can spot and speckle if you're not careful, but it will protect it. And now you just have regular glass in a pre-cut frame with the thinner 140 pound paper, and you're good to go. And the back of this is really simple. It's already got the hooks set up. All you have to do is the wire, and you can turn it either direction. So you can do it portrait or landscape. So I'll show you how to do this in the class, but it's just a much cheaper way to get out the door. Go get your own frame and do it at home. Skip the mat. That's the only big difference here. Okay, so how to set up a still life. Let me just very briefly talk about that. I know most of you guys are using the one that I provided, but you can set up your own still lifes, and I know some of you will be, I hope that all of you are doing this at some point. So here's how I do it. I keep it simple. So what I did is I went out to an antique shop. I bought 3 pieces of ceramics and just came home and just played around with the arrangement of those. I tried it with lace instead of just a solid color. I decided to go simpler, so I just went with a solid color for the tablecloth, and then just set it up. And what I do is I wait for sunrise. So get up early, wait for the sun to come up, or if that doesn't work, wait for the sunset. But get the end of the day, the golden hour when that light is getting interesting. So this was right at sunrise, and I just snapped away. I probably took 50 photos, and I tried it, higher angle, lower level, switch things around occasionally, look for interesting reflections and how the objects interacted with each other, and just played around with it. Then after I had that part finished, I went back through it and just kind of got down to maybe the 5 most interesting photos that I could find, and then picked one to go with. So that's how I started it. So this was the photos that came of all of that. And actually the lace version is on the back, and that gave me a headache just looking at it. So that was the photos. Maybe that was the lace version. Lace and regular. Lace. And then if you have Photoshop, what you do is go into the filters and go to photocopy, and then go to artistic, or it's the other way around. Go to artistic and go to photocopy. I'll get that clarified for you. What that does then is it very quickly, immediately converts your photo to a line drawing. And this is reverse, so I just flipped it so that I would have one less step to do with tracing paper. And then I took this out to Office Depot and asked them to blow it up to 16 by 20. And actually I did a couple of these because I did this one first and it didn't use up the full paper the way I wanted it, so I went back out. And these were under $2 a piece, so very reasonable. And so and this is reversed again, because then I put tracing paper over the top of this, like so. So I put the tracing paper over the top, trace over it. Now I have carbon pencil lead on the top side here. Then I take that and flip it over onto the watercolor paper. Now the carbon's down, the pencil lead is down, and then just trace over it again, and it comes out off on your paper. So there's a lot of steps there, but really after you do it a time or two, it's not that complicated. Probably the trickiest thing is getting the photo editing program figured out, where to go to convert your photo to a line drawing. In the past, before technology allowed it, I used to just take these and have to blow this up and then mess with that, or with Photoshop I can turn it to a line drawing in a few seconds, so super easy. Okay, so for inspiration, if you do Facebook, there's a group on there called Contemporary Still Life Group. You have to apply to be accepted, and they'll accept you in a couple of hours. It's very interesting. There's some really high-end artists in there. There's a lot of beginners in there too. They seem to be a little bit of a tough group, because I've posted things and gotten like a like It's like, wow. And then you look at some of the other ones and they've got hundreds of likes, and you're like, I think you have to get in there and kind of, you have to become a real participating member. But it's very inspirational. So if you're interested, I'm sure there's other still life groups on Facebook, but this is one that I've checked out. And out of that experience, I came across this artist. His name is Henk Helmantel. He's Dutch. He's been doing still lifes since like the 70s. He's amazing, unbelievably talented. They're soft. He does a lot of the reverse Rembrandt type of lighting that I'll talk about it more. But if you get a chance, he does have a website. He's also represented all over the world in galleries, so a lot of galleries have his work. When you go in there, his website isn't the first thing that comes up. It's this gallery and that gallery and this museum, but his stuff's amazing. And then Sun Warren is the artist that I took a workshop with this technique that we're doing here, and she has a brand new painting that she just finished. She's an amazing watercolorist, especially with glass reflections and crystal cut glass type things. So anyway, those are a couple of inspirational folks. And if you have any things to share next class, whether it's things like inspiration or materials, I bought a new palette that I want to share. So if you come across any things that will help for the benefit of the group, please do. So on my cylinder drawing up here, I wanted to just real quickly mention what I did with mine. I'm dealing basically with 4 cylinders. We have the gravy bowl, the saucer, the vase, and the bowl. So you've got 4 cylinders. So with the cylinder, what you've got then, the light on my composition is coming from the left. The light goes from light to dark on the outside of the cylinder, and then inside the cylinder, you reverse it. So this is shadow, and then this would be light. So if you just kind of keep that in mind as you work, if you're doing this composition, that will help you out. It just reverses inside of an open cylinder. Does that make sense?
Would you say that again, please?
Sure. Now, these are all cylinders. So basically the gravy bowl has a cylinder shape. So does the saucer. Mm-hmm. So does the vase, and so does the bowl. So with the light coming from the left, it's going to tend to be lighter towards the light source and darker away from it. But you reverse that on the inside of the cylinder. So like on the gravy bowl, it goes from darker to lighter on all of the cylinders. Darker on the saucer to lighter, dark to light, dark to light. So it's just something to keep in mind as you go. All right. Any questions, any things about watercolor or anything?
I'm curious about the prices that you have after those things, after the paper.
I've got, I'm sorry, I have a few leftover calendars. They're 2022s of my artwork. So I have extras if anybody's interested. I've got them up here. $25.
And then the paper, are you selling that?
I've got, I do have Arches, 140-pound cold press. If anybody wants a full sheet for $5, it's cost. It's when you buy a block of watercolor paper, it's typically 20 sheets for $100. That's the basic going price. You can find it on sale once in a while, but anyway, I've got full sheets. This is 18 by 24, so $5 a sheet. If anybody, if you do this painting and you aren't sure if you want to try out Arches paper, check it out and see what you think.
Also, I have a question on
Sure.
your cerulean blue that granulates. Did you say that was Winsor?
Windsor. Yep.
Thank you.
Yep. Okay, well, let's get started painting. I know a lot of you are past this step, but what I'm going to do first today is I'm really going to, because this is complex, you could have masked this off, or I could have done this masked off. And if you did, it's fine because it'll actually help you out in some steps. But I didn't mask it. The upside of that is you don't have to mask it. The downside is when you do the black, you're going to have to paint around this. So either way, you're going to be doing some detailed work, but either way can work. So let's go ahead and we'll start with this. And if you want to come up a little bit closer, please do. If you're already past this and you don't need to.
So, what color yellow is this?
Okay, this color, this is Urillion.
Urillion.
Yeah. Any yellow could work with this. This is the color that Sun Warren uses. It's kind of an ambient color that's going to be underneath the black for the most part. So this isn't going to stay yellow on your painting. It's just an undercoat. The other thing that you could definitely use with this is the old fail-safe quinacridone gold. I mean, that would work perfectly. The quinacridone gold is one of my favorite colors. It's a very transparent color. So it'll why don't I use this today just to show you?
Why you want trees.
Yeah, let's use this.
That and some paint is great, maybe.
Yeah. Also, while we're getting ready to use brushes, the silver black velvets are fantastic. They're the ones I recommended on the materials list. I know a lot of you are using them. I did invest in a 1-inch, so I don't remember. I bought this several years ago. It's fairly pricey, but the brushes themselves really aren't super. They're like a mid-price brush, and they're really great quality. So there's 3 basic techniques with watercolor. There's the wet on wet, and what that means is the paper's wet and your brush is wet, and that's what I'm going to use here. So I'm going to very quickly just lay down. I've got a little color in my brush, I can see, but it's not a problem. I'm going to lay down just some water, and I'm not worrying about anything. I'm going to paint everywhere with water except for the tablecloth. So I might have to get a smaller brush in a few spots here.
Ken, any idea what the humidity is in this room? Did it keep the rooms, would it humidify or natural?
You know, they've got a new, this is new, so I would say it's pretty dry, but what do you think, Nellie?
Why?
Those aren't, I don't think those are humidifiers, those are just
Air filters.
air filters
Yeah.
for COVID.
I would say very dry, basically.
Yeah.
So, what's that got to do with painting? Does it
Well, I have problems with water control.
Oh,
Things dry out
okay.
too fast.
Oh, okay,
And
so
it's-
if
it's
you're in a
only
humid
25
room.
Yeah,
I
25
didn't know
degrees or percent in my house. And when I watch some of these videos, this guy is painting and his paper doesn't curl.
Yes, I was
Down
wondering, it's
south,
like, how you
Florida.
going to keep it wet through this whole thing? That's what I was
You know,
wondering.
that's a good question. This paper is sized, which means it's going to hold this moisture in it, Sandy. So even as it dries, you can see right here, even though it doesn't have a sheen on the surface where I started, it still has lots of moisture in it, and it's this internal sizing that the more expensive papers
And that's
have.
how Arch is the one we use.
Yes,
The
this is the
Arches.
Arches 140-pound cold pressed.
Okay.
It's like in my opinion, it's at least the platinum standard. The 300-pound Arches is fantastic too. It's twice as thick as this, but I like the 140 actually.
I actually have some of that, but I'll wait till I'm retired before I crank that baby out there.
Don't make any mistakes on that.
That's what I'm saying, you know.
Yeah, it's pricey. Now this, I think what's happening is I'm lifting a little bit of this graphite, and that's why we're kind of getting this gray. But it's not going to be a problem. Somebody had asked me that in a message is, what happens with my pencil? How am I going to paint over it? It's not a problem. You might end up with a few pencil lines that show, but you can erase those after everything's dry, so don't worry about sketching on the watercolor paper with pencil. It shouldn't be a problem. Okay, and I got a little sloppy. Did I miss some spots?
From this end, there you go.
Yeah.
No, you did.
Sorry.
Yeah. Now you could, you could spritz. You could use a sponge.
There's still some dry spots. I can see it.
We'll just kind of work it
They're over here, right there.
Okay.
Yeah, go up and down.
Yep.
Good.
All right. I'm going to grab a tissue here, a paper towel.
So is it hard for you to use your new palette?
I haven't even touched it.
That's what I'm saying, is it hard? for
Yeah,
you?
well, what I want to do, this was my
Okay.
bad mistake that I've made in the past, is not having a
The
map
name
with
on
my
it?
colors.
Right.
So I've gotten smarter with this one. This one, I just kind of go to it, and I know that that's quinacridone gold. I know that
Just know it.
those are the ones I'm always
Yeah.
using, but then I get over here and I'm like, what? I didn't make a map. So
Right.
before I do this, I'm going to make sure I know what's where.
Yeah, that's a good.
Okay, so we're going wet on wet. So the paper's wet. I'm allowing the sheen to come off of it a little bit. All that means is that it's drying just a little. And so it still has lots of moisture in it. And now the brush is going to be loaded with water and pigment. And this is quinacridone gold. You know, and it's weird because that will look like a brown. It almost looks like a sienna brown. When you put it on here, it's going to look yellowish.
Oh.
So that it's just a very interesting color.
Hmm. How do they make these colors?
I don't know. Chemicals and
Oh, yeah.
pigments, and
Wow.
some of these companies have been around for a very long time.
Mhm.
You can see that very little pigment's really needed. I mean, this
So you
really,
want some texture left in that can?
it's okay if it gets texture. It really isn't super important because it'll be covered
Oh, it'll
with
be
that
covered
black
with it.
color, so it doesn't really matter. And you can paint right out to the edge. I'm going to talk more, or do a demo on how to stretch watercolor paper, but for now, we're just going to paint.
Okay, so we're doing it with yellow and then we're gonna cover it with black, and so what is the purpose of the yellow?
Ambiance, just kind of it actually, if you could compare this right next to a painting that had pure black, you would see a difference. This has more of an ambiance to it, or a glow that'll be under it.
Does the pouring procedure any different? Pouring over another wash as opposed to pouring on top of just white paper?
So
Does
pouring,
it go
like,
slower? Does it go slower, faster? Does it streak or anything like
do you mean if you poured over this color now?
that? Yeah,
or-
no, after it's dry and you pour the black.
Okay.
Is it slower to dry? Does it have streaks?
It would probably tend to pool in places and be less less evenly coated. And I would also think it might be thinner in places.
Okay.
I will tell you, I ended up doing, I would say, 3 to 4 coats on this, and I usually only
Three
do
or four
2.
coats of black?
3 to 4 coats of black. I had technical problems with it. The first time that I did it, it ended up with a halo because I sort of, I think I didn't work quickly enough, or I'll show you guys as I go, but I ended up with a halo around the object. So the second time, it got better, and you can still actually see, if you get over here, you'll see all kinds of things about it, but I'm probably the only one that really notices it. But it had a definite halo the first couple of coats. So I would say I did 3 to 4 on that. That was probably the most time-consuming aspect of that whole painting. Okay, so to save us time and trouble, I'm going right over the objects. And that's one of the reasons I was drawn to the colors of this pottery, just because I knew that it would probably work to save us several steps on this painting. You know, if you were doing all kinds of different colors, you know, blues and reds and greens that were different than this, you may have to mask all of this off. But with these colors being kind of that terracotta, everything seemed kind of similar, I figured that the yellow would be just fine. So I did mask the lemons, and you can see that's resisting.
I almost like your lemons better, the darker ones.
Do you?
You missed a whole lemon.
I did mask the whole lemons here. Those of you that were here earlier, I mentioned it to you. I was kind of disappointed that these seemed kind of muddy to me. They kind of got kind of dull looking. And so I think it was actually just the shadowed color that I was using, but I started thinking maybe it was this step. Because whatever you put on your paper, the first step is going to stain your paper. You're never going to get completely rid of it. Now you can, I could right now take off some of this. This actually might be kind of a smart thing to do once in a while, is kind of look at where your highlights are. And while this is wet, it's really pretty easy to lift the pigment, but there's still pigment. It doesn't matter how much I tried to get this off, and I could scrub it and do whatever. That's already stained your paper. It's permanently stained to some extent. So just know that there's no way that you can return to white unless you've masked it off. And if you've masked it off, it just retains whatever color is under it. So if you mask the raw paper, it's white. You could let this completely dry and mask this off, and it would retain the quinacridone gold. So whatever color you're masking on top of, it'll preserve. It'll leave it there.
Wow.
Now, one caution is never use masking fluid on wet paper because it won't work. It'll allow, when you wash over that, it'll seep through. So don't, never apply to wet paper. Make sure it's completely dry. Okay, and I see a couple of spots that are just kind of getting lighter here. And so I'm just going to add a little more pigment to it. It's not a big deal at all, but so that's basically your undercoat. With any type of yellow would be great. Urillion is what Sun Warren uses. This is quinacridone gold, cadmium yellow, Turner yellow, Windsor yellow. Any kind of yellow would work for this.
I can, completely unrelated, if you're painting on a block, is that okay?
It is okay. I just watched an interesting video. The guy, he has the Mind of Watercolor. He's got a YouTube channel. He's very good. He was talking about people believe that blocks are stretched, and they're not.
Okay.
He's saying they're better than a loose piece of paper, and it's fine to paint directly on it, but as soon as you remove that from that block, it is going to ripple.
Okay.
And it's
So
because
you
it's
should take
not.
them off,
You should
stretch
take them
them.
off and
Okay.
stretch them, because this is a block piece of paper, but I took it off and stretched it.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So you
Just
got it
left
wet
there
and
to dry.
stretched.
Sorry.
Just let your,
You
I
still
have noticed that it
basically.
gets wrinkles, but not as bad as like just
No.
a piece of paper. But
It would probably be better, Lou. I don't think it would completely. It would never be like a stretched piece of paper, though. It still would tend to get some buckling and rippling. So the idea of stretching a watercolor paper is just to prevent the rippling, especially while you're painting. Because if you have a lot of these kind of ripples, even a stretched paper is again going to ripple and buckle a little bit, but it'll settle down. It'll all just kind of stretch back. It's like a drum. It'll just kind of tighten up as it dries. So there's step one if you have not done that step. And then I notice some of you have already done that step. I just want to very briefly show this one. What you want to do next after this is completely dry is you want to pick out a color for your tablecloth. And I can tell you how to do this color, but I'll tell you, let me do that right now. Cerulean blue, and if you have the quinacridone gold, we'll give you a kind of an aqua. And if you happen to have, these Magello or Viejo Mission colors, this peacock blue is fantastic, and that's actually this color. So I cheated. I didn't have this on the supply list, but I did have a whole set of these, and I was looking around and I tried this, and it's fantastic. So if you want to try it, it only takes a tiny dab of this to get the blue on your paper. So if you want to try it, it's peacock blue. And this is a different brand, Magello Mission, and they're fantastic. They're very concentrated,
Very
brilliant.
pigmented, so a little dangerous.
Yeah, don't waste them. But anyway, you are welcome to try that, or mix your own with blue and yellow and just experiment with the, and you could change the color of the tablecloth. That's totally up to you. I thought that the blue went well with the color scheme, but that's totally up to you. And so
So is that just a plain coat, down here?
this is just one coat, just a plain coat. I haven't tried any details with the wrinkles or anything like
Well,
this.
this right here, what'd you do there? Did you just like try to get off some of the?
Yes, and that's a bloom, and this is something that happens as the pigment and the water interact on watercolor paper.
Right. You didn't do it on purpose?
I didn't do it on purpose,
Okay,
but I can
okay.
fix it. It's not a problem. It's
All right,
just
Because it looks like it's right on the line.
Yeah,
I was kind of, I think I was trying to get the edge of the table just kind of defined, but not very well.
Is that wet on wet as well?
Yes, this was wet on wet. And then with this color, I just put a darker base down on here, so you can mix this a couple of different ways. If you happen to have like terracotta type color,
Is it called terracotta?
hang on, I have it here, Sandy, somewhere.
Is it a mission? I have some mission.
It could, it's either Mission or it's the Windsor Newton. For some reason, hang on, I'll get that color for it. Oh, it's Venetian red, sorry.
Okay.
Windsor Newton's Venetian red. It's this color right here.
Oh, okay.
And I don't even know if that was on your supply list, so if it isn't, just you can mix this color. One way to get it would be use Payne's Gray and red. Start with those two because Payne's Gray is loaded with blue. So you get a little bit of blue, a little bit of red together, you'll kind of start to get this terracotta type color. But if you're having any trouble mixing that, just let me know and I'll help you out. So the next step, if you've already gone past the yellow, you can establish the base color on your tablecloth and then just get the base color on all the other parts of the painting. And this is mostly just more yellow and a little bit of that terracotta. So you can kind of glaze it and build it up. Now, if you want to dry anything, there's a dryer right up here. Just come up and dry your work. And there's some other dryers around the room, so you can speed up the process and get it dry. Nicely get a good edge. They're just amazing brushes. And so I'm just getting some pigment on the paper first, and now I'm just going to kind of move it around by diluting it slightly.
Did you wet your paper or is it wet
No,
on dry?
it's dry paper, so I'm doing wet on dry.
Okay.
Wet brush, dry paper. Now to darken this later to get those shadows in here, you could add Payne's Gray would work. A color that I used also to get some of my darker shadows was the Prussian Blue. And if you don't have either one of those colors, just a touch of, take a little bit of black and mix it with this, with whatever your blue is. Be careful with black though, because it can very quickly overpower everything, so go easy with it. You might get mud in a hurry if you're not careful.
So this is a mix of peacock blue and what?
This is just straight peacock blue. Yeah. Once I got into this, I was like, wow, that's just so much easier than trying to mix this color. It's a great color.
What did you say about Prussian blue? Prussian blue would be
Prussian
darker?
blue would be fantastic to do these shadows like this in.
Okay.
And you
okay.
could start to do this at this point. If you haven't done the tablecloth yet, I'm going to go ahead and drop in some Prussian blue. I can figure out where I have it. Well, since I don't know where it is here. I know that I've got it over here. Okay, so I've got a little bit of this Prussian blue. The other thing that could work here is any dark blue, like indigo blue.
Indigo blue?
Yeah, indigo blue would actually work fantastically with this step.
What could we use instead of peacock?
You could use cerulean blue and a little bit of the quinacridone gold. Try that. That'll kind of give you a golden color.
I don't need much.
Okay, so in lieu of not because I didn't find the Prussian blue, I know where I've got indigo, and indigo is perfect for this. So I'm going to drop in. This is wet on wet. My paper's nice and wet now. My brush is nice and wet.
Prussian is the shadow. No, that's okay. Totally fine. Anyway, no, we're good. I can use the indigo. I have indigo. Thank you.
And this does not have to be finished or perfect in any way. You just kind of get it established. Start establishing your shadows. And then this is one of those steps on this painting where you can kind of, work with the paper and let the watercolors kind of be watercolors. Let them sort of do their thing a little bit. So what I'm trying to do is have the light source become more obvious that it's coming from the left, and then the shadows are running towards the right. And again, you can come back later and soften edges. You're probably going to end up doing another glaze or another coat over this at some point. So this doesn't have to be perfect. Just kind of get it started. But you kind of want this corner of your tablecloth to be dark. So I could even lay in a little bit more shadow over here possibly. And then I haven't accounted for the edge of the tablecloth. And this would probably be a good time to kind of get that roughed in. I'm going to go to the bigger brush and just go to the 1-inch brush. I'm going to pick up some more indigo blue. And I'm just going to make a bold move here and kind of go for it. Okay, I've switched over to a touch of Payne's Gray, just because I was getting a little low on the indigo. The Payne's Gray would work just great for shadows on this peacock blue or the cerulean blue. So I'm kind of getting a little ripple from those staples, but again, I can take care of that with ripples on the tablecloth anyway. And then one other real quick thing here while it's wet, take a paper towel and lift just a smidge. I'm going to lift a little bit of light just along the edge of that tablecloth. So I'm just taking a tissue while it's wet. See that already starts to give it that watercolor look. And I'll tell you what I did with this example is I didn't fret a whole bunch about where these should go. I just started lifting some ripples, some folds and creases on the tablecloth. And just kind of got them established a little bit, and then I'll come back in and do some shading and kind of build those up. So just kind of go for it. Even if you wanted to, I just kind of thought where I thought a ripple might work, or sometimes the paper kind of shows you where it wants to have a little highlight, and you can just pick that up. So just kind of get it roughed in a little bit. So just creases or wrinkles on the table.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, people don't iron anymore. I don't anyway.
I wish I didn't.
The only time you might want to iron is if your watercolor paper is really rippled. That is a technique that can
Really?
actually flatten
Oh
it
my
out.
gosh.
Yes.
Oh, you can iron
You can iron it. You have to put a cloth over it, but then iron it. I'll tell you later, I found I know why I had so many coats on this. I found out the hard way that one of the old techniques that works great for flattening watercolor is you spritz the back of the paper, get it somewhat damp, and then lay another piece of paper on it and some weight on it. Well, I did that to this painting, and when I lifted it off, the black was speckled. It had parts where the water had it looked horrible. It looked like, but it didn't affect the pottery or the tablecloth at all. It was just the black. So don't do that, and I'll explain more about that later.
So did you wet and then lift, or?
I painted this on wet with a darker paint
okay.
spray, and then while it's wet, like right now, I can still do it. I just press a little bit and
All right.
lift it right off.
All right.